All right, we are picking up where we left off because I had to attend to a birthday party of my nephew, and honestly wasn't expecting to get back in time, but here we are, and we are going to proceed with our response towards the individual who calls himself Thermal STALK. Where we left off is where we were looking at a blog from someone named AZ Blog Talk, and we're going to take a look at his article on the where is in reference to where I cited. One place to check a look at is the masked Arabs video on the shape of the earth. So here we go. Now, first of all, before we continue with the response, just going to let this be pointed out that concerning this individual, he did admit that the Quran does not contain scientific miracles or statements, but rather utilizes the understanding of what they observed, hence which is a simpler thing with the Bible with theological messaging and the likes of that. So this is the only part so far that seems to be okay. But then this response is made, which seems to sort of conflict with that. So let's just go over the article that he's trying to cite. So here we go. It seems that some of the masked Arab fans are not careful readers. The point in this article is to address the claim that why are many scholars cite the whale narrative. This question is a false assumption by the masked Arab based on the following premises. Number one, it dictates that scholars must have general consensus and general agreement regarding the meaning of the letter. I think it says litter, but I think he meant letter, which, as I will demonstrate later on, that is not the case. The scholars have cited many other possible meanings to the letter, rendering the masked Arab's hypothesis to be futile. From the above two premises, we can clearly see that the masked Arab question as to why many scholars regard the whale narrative as the only possible explanation, or as some of his fans strawman this question to desperately save his fallacious argument, as they put it. Why do so many scholars cite the whale narrative and the tafsir? As stated again from the above two premises, this question is regarded as a straw man on all scholars on the tafsir. First, none of them regard the whale narrative as the only possible explanation. Again, I don't think that's what he would have been saying either. So, continuing onward, we go to the issues. His first issue is that he just rambles on. Okay, so that we can skip that. 6:14 of the video. The second issue where he says, quote, his video, he actually starts his argument. This was 6 minutes of incoherent rambling where he never addresses the main issue ahead, but I shall start now critiquing his video. He cites Tafsir Ibn Kathir. He states the following. The first thing God created was the pen. He ordered it to write. It said, what shall I write? He said, write the fate of everything. So I wrote what will happen from the day until the day of judgment. Then created the Nun, whale. Then he raised the water and created the heavens with it, and it laid the earth on the back of the Nun, whale. The Nun, whale, moved on, so did the earth. So it was fixed down with the mountains. So that's the quote from Ibn Kathir's Arabic tafsir, which you won't find in the English abridged translation that they have. Then it says, this is where my main issue lies down. What the masked Arab did is he dishonestly left out the rest of the tafsir, where there is a clear contradiction regarding what the Nun is, and this story of creation. Let's now use the very link and very source used by the masked Arab to uncover this dishonesty. Okay, so just make it sure we get clear. He is saying there is a contradiction in understanding and interpreting this. In other words, the Quran's not clear. Glad we've established that one, Mr. AZ Blog Talk, or whatever your name is. So he says then there's other ones where it then cites Muhammad and his interpretation, where it says, another hadith regarding that, it was narrated from Ibn Askar, from Abi Abdullah, the master of the Banu Ummah, from Abi Sali, from Abi Hurayrah, I heard the Prophet Muhammad say, the first thing God created was the pen, then the nun, and it's the inkwell. Then he said to it, and it replied, what shall I write? He said, write what will happen, or that is happening from a deed, or gain, or mark. Then it wrote down to the day of resurrection, and so it said, nun, by the pen, and what they write. Then he sealed down on the pen, never write till the judgment day. Okay, so we have where it's referred to as the inkwell. Okay, so then the only thing we've refuted or showed that was different is the meaning of the nun. What we have here is also still, if we were to remove the references to the nun, we have the issue of then created, and then he raised the water and created the heavens with it, and laid the earth on the back of the inkwell. Then the inkwell moved, and so did the earth. But the point is that the earth is still fixed on something, is still on something, in a Sahih, authentic hadith, according to Islamic hadith scholars. So all we have here then is a similar story about the pen, and that this nun is then identified as the inkwell, according to Muhammad. But we'll show how there's also a conflict with that. Anyways, he says, this is quite astonishing. The Master Arab clearly left out the part of the tafsir because it clearly refuted him. By now it shall be apparent that the video is refuted. We have clear hadith from the Prophet, however, this doesn't stop that there have another alleged hadith narration directly from the Prophet. However, we're not going to read those because according to a note that he left in April the 4th of this year, he said, thanks to the Islam Issue blogger, the above hadiths under the source of 2 and 3 are fabrication. So the hadiths that he later on would cite have been identified as fabricated. But the one that he does cite next, which is under number 4, that isn't a fabrication, is, and others have said, nun, one of the letters of Rahman. It can't, and so he then says, it can't get any more embarrassing than that. This is the man that the masked Arab will later on glorify as the ultimate authority in tafsir, even though that is indeed what some Islamic scholars do, is they do put his tafsir interpretation as a very authoritative thing. And he clearly contradicted himself. So right here, then, we get to the issue of, again, another issue with Islam that would then be making more complications and problems. Is even the contradictions of interpretations from people who are said to be very authoritative and very respectful, including people like Ibn Abbas and Muhammad, which we will get into why I find this interesting with Ibn Abbas in a few. So it says, translate into, we were told, Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Maruzi said, we are told by Ali bin Hussein, he said, we were told by my father Zayd from Ibn Abbas. Okay, all we have here is al-Wam and W-N, the letters of the merciful one separated. Okay, that doesn't tell us much. So he then goes on to say that the masked Arab criticized the translators of the Q-Tafsir website when they don't cite the full translation of Ibn Kathir, and he says, like, maybe they're trying to hide something from you. This is very ironic. I ask now, why did you hide the rest of the tafsir that you cited when it clearly contradicts you? Well, if that's the case, then why is there an abridged version of Ibn Kathir? Why not publish a translation of the unabridged entirety, full-scale tafsir of Ibn Kathir? Where is that? Anyways, then the next thing he says, of his video, he cites the English translation of Tanwir al-Mikbas, claiming that it translates it accurately. But honestly, I couldn't believe what he did there either. But I believe his fans didn't notice something strange within the English tafsir he cited. The full text of the tafsir is as follows. And from his narration on the authority of Ibn Abbas, that he said regarding the interpretation of Allah as saying nun, he says, Allah swears by the Nun, which is the whale that carries the earth on its back while in water, beneath which is the bull, and under the bull is the rock, and under the rock is the dust, and none knows what is under the dust save Allah. The name of the whale is Lawash, and it is said its name is Lutia. The name of the bull is Bahumat, and some say its name is Talhut or Leona. The whale is in a sea called Adwad, and it is like a small bull in a huge sea. The sea in it is in a hollowed rock, whereby there is 4,000 cracks, and from each crack water springs out of the earth. It is also said that Nun is one of the names of the Lord. It stands for the letter Nun in Allah's name, Al-Rahman, the beneficent. And it is also said that a Nun in an inkwell by the pen. Allah swore by the pen. This pen is made of light, and its height is equal to the distance between heaven and earth. It is with this pen that the wise remembrance, the guarded tablet, was written. It is also said that the pen is one of the angels by whom Allah has sworn, and that which they write therewith. And Allah also swore by what the angels wrote down of the works of the children of Adam. So it says here, the Master Arab yet claims the translation mentions the whale, but if we read carefully, as you can see in the highlighted text with the bold and underline, this says that there is other meanings of Nun. I didn't manipulate anything here. You can go directly to the website or click on the Master Arab link yourself. I was honestly shocked when I noticed none of his fans pointed out such an error. Is this how gullible they are? Is this how myopic they are? Couldn't they notice this direct contradiction within the source cited by the Master Arab? I would have been able to notice it, and in fact I did. The point is, though, that we have this source there, and if we're going to have then going with another thing, claim that's a contradiction, then congratulations, you have no way to objectively determine the definition of this. So there's where we then enter the problem of these things. Now I'm going to get some other videos on standby. Oh, we had some commercial pull up there, which is why I hope they just take away these ads in general from YouTube, because honestly don't need them. Anyways, so continuing onward, shall we? So as we can see, scholars are not clear about the actual meaning of the letter, meaning the Quran's not clear, and some people don't even know, even under scholars, what is meant by that verse, since they, quote, contradict themselves regarding the meaning. That's not me. That's the author of this Islamic blog. They're saying they contradict themselves regarding the meaning. Therefore, we don't have a clear Quran. Next, he says he cites Tafsir al-Jalalain to accommodate his hypothesis that early Muslims believed the earth is flat. Not only is this a red herring fallacy and has nothing to do with the topic of whale Nun in the Quran, but let's address it anyways. That is actually part of what the video is about. It's about the flat earth. The problem here is that this tafsir is very late. Right after the discovery of the sun being larger, even al-Jalalain himself admit to the discovery of the astronauts, yet he disapprove of it. His tafsir is very late. That should give even more reason to accept if it's a globe earth or a flat earth. So there's a problem there. But says, notice how in his video regarding the claim in the Quran sits in a murky water, he tries to cite the earliest tafsirs to claim that the verse is literal, which I addressed in my previous articles. However, let us see what the earliest scholars of tafsir said about this verse. So he gives us two. Number one is, meaning how it was expanded and made vast extended. And if he did now do that, then living in it and benefiting from it would be impossible. Another one says, we are told by Bashir, he said, Zayd told us from Qatada, and the earth, how it spread it out, meaning extended, and he said, can't the ones who created this can create what he wants in paradise? So notice that for these two, all we have is has been spread out and expanded. Same language in the Bible, and guess what that is? Flat earth. Flat surface. So these tafsirs that you cited, which are in Arabic, and I don't know if there's going to be any sources that's going to be provided in English that tells me who these people are. Either way, these two tafsirs are now part of what is just simply seen as describing the flat earth. Now, according to Qurtubi, it says, and the earth, how it was spread out, meaning it was spread out and extended. Again, flat earth from Qurtubi. So as we can see, the overwhelming majority of scholars agree that the verse is referring to the earth on its proto-state being spread out. I don't see where it says anything about the proto-state in the context. None of them suggest a flat earth. Well, it does, based off of the language it just utilized. Why did the master Arab use a very late tafsir that was written after the discovery of the round earth? This is rather a perplexing and quite honestly dishonest tactic. But his claim that this tafsir in Arabic says ulama agreed on flat earth is still worth addressing. At no point does Al-Jalalain claim ijma of scholars. He merely point out that there are scholars who claimed a flat earth. Interestingly, according to Ibn Hazim in his book Al-Fasil fi al-Malal wa al-Hawa wa al-Nil, under chapter The Evidence for the Spherical Shape of the Earth, he states the following. Abu Muhammad said, and that is when we, inshallah, in mentioning some of what they objected to, and that is that they said that evidence suggests that the earth is spherical, and the majority agree on that. This is Ibn Hazim, who died at 456 Hijri. Alright, so we have one that accepts a spherical earth at that point. And then in another one, Ibn Taymiyyah, and he asked, may Allah have mercy on him, about these two men arguing on the shape of the sky and the earth. Are they spherical? One of them said they are spherical, and the other denied it and said it has no origin. So what is the correct one? Essentially, this little thing keeps going on until by the time it gets to simply saying that they didn't deny that it was spherical, but said that it was a possibility after they've had the discussion and the discourse. Because they also said it can be a rectangle or a six-sided shape or anything. And so then we have another one that says, and Imam Abu Husayn Ahmed ibn Jafar bin Munandi, from the notable famous scholars, by knowing the marks and the categories of old ones in the religious arts, on the second level from the companions of Ahmed, said there is no difference between the scholars on the shape of the sphere. Even though there was some that did kind of have that kind of debacle, and while the scholars of a later period would have said something, there is still differences between the people that are in the companions versus the scholars. So there's still a differentiation. Next we have, he said, and they also had general consensus, ijma of scholars, that earth with all its movements from land to sea are like that of a sphere. He said, and it's evident that the sun, the moon, and the stars don't appear on all corners of the earth except in one time, but only in sunrise and sunsets. So now we get to the part where it talks about the imaginary debate argument with the Muslim, or the basically someone that tries to play the role of the Muslim. And we're just gonna play the little bit of the clip on audio. So let's see here. First of all, what he says is, at this point says, wait a second. First, his imaginary character claims that these hadith are not authentic. I have never seen a single apologetic, I think you mean apologist, who makes such claims regarding these tafsirs. I have. In fact, there are several of them that will usually try to say that they are not authentic. There are even people that try to say that the past the hadiths, or even the tafsirs that mention hadith from either Al-Bukhari or from Muslim, or even in ones that can be considered authentic but yet are found in tafsirs, will just be dismissed because of personal feelings. So yeah, there are some of those people that exist. So let's try to go over this. Let's see. So he just tries to say we'll just go back to another one, but at this point that's not even really dealing with the issue. He says the Master Arab cites Islam QA as a reply to anyone who claims that there's variations in other meanings is regarding Nun. However, if we read the website in question, the question here was specifically asking about the whale meaning. So, of course, it will logically follow that the author of the website will address the meaning of the whale exclusively. However, I think what our friend here is not realizing is the point. Now, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's just play the clip from the masked Arab and let's see where it goes.
With your objections in a civil and constructive manner.
Okay, you filthy infidel. Lol. First of all, these hadiths are not authentic.
That's simply wrong. While there are plenty of variations for this hadith, some of which are classified as weak, there are a number of other variations which are fully authentic. This one reads as follows. Ibn Abbas says, the first thing that Allah created was the pen. He told it to write. So it wrote everything that will happen until the final hour arrives. Then he created the Nun whale above the water. Then he placed the earth on it. Some other variations are also confirmed as authentic and in line with the methodology used by Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim.
And so y'all know, if you want to check that out, you can of course check his video out, and there will be, in fact, I'll just go ahead and link the video for the live chat to check out. And there is a part in there where it addresses the website's called HD, basically it's hadith without an A .com, and the link that he provides takes to the authentic hadith for the earth on the back of the whale story being authentic in different variations of the telling of the story. But listen to what he has to say here, and he's going to go to Islam QA, and we're going to keep it paused on there in a bit so that we can deal with what is stated.
By a scholar who used to classify hadiths called Al-Hakim in his book called Al-Mustadrak. These are referenced on this page by Islam QA, which tries to wriggle out of the problem but does not deny it has been classified as authentic.
So, they tried to deal with the whole thing, but it also still mentions the whole thing here about, quote, the Nun, i.e. the whale, was created and the earth was spread out on the back of the Nun. And that this is considered sahih. So what does our friend here say? He simply just talks about, well, it's talking about the whale. It's like, I came across a report which says that the earth is placed on the back of a bull, and when the bull moves its head, earthquakes happen. Think that I saw this in Ibn Kathir, even though that's a think. As we can see, this question was directly addressing one of the meanings driven directly to the whale, or rather bull here. So it will not be logical for the scholar of this website to address the other possible meanings of the word. However, I do found the website directly addresses the verse in question and gives the general meaning of the verse. So he said he found the website that directly addresses the verse in question. So it says, and it was said, and this is a translation of the Arabic, and what God said by Nun is inkwell and pen. Pen Ibn Jarir. We were told by Abdullah, we were told by Ibn Thor, from Mumar, from Hassan. So it keeps saying people saying that it's all about the inkwell. It was said that this hadith is marfu garib. So Ibn al-Hatim said, we were told by my father that we were told Hisham. So he keeps saying more people that they were told on the meaning of it being the inkwell. And then another one, which is interesting, says from Ibn Abbas, said that Allah created Nun and it's the inkwell. Alright? Then that just provides the contradiction then, because according to this narrative, Ibn Abbas also said, because according to Ibn Kathir, it was from the authority of Ibn Abbas, this is his interpretation, and it said it was narrated from Ibn Abbas, that he said the first thing that Allah created was the pen, so he's given this interpretation. Not saying this is one possibility, because it's Ibn Kathir who's then giving the different interpretations and different possibilities. So then you have Ibn Abbas, who's supposed to have the interpretation of the Quran from Allah, and we'll show why that's the case in a bit. In fact, let me get something set up here concerning one individual. So let's go ahead and pull this up. Alright. But here's the thing. This hadith, which talks about the whale being placed and spread out on the back of the Nun as flat, is a Sahih Isnad, and it said that it was narrated by Abd al-Razak in his tafsir, Ibn Abi Shabi, Ibn Abi Hatim, as mentioned in Ibn Kathir, Al-Tabari in Jami, Al-Bain, Al-Hakim, and Al-Mustadrak, and many others. All of them narrated via Al-Masih or Al-Mash from Abu Zahin Hussein Ibn Jundub from Ibn Abbas. According to it, it says that it meets the conditions of Sahih according to Al-Bukhari and Al-Muslim, and although they did not narrate it. And it says Al-Dabi said in Al-Taqiz, it is Sahih according to the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, as was narrated from these people that were mentioned. And there we go. And here's where it even gets more crazier with this. Because let's go ahead and take a look here. Because he doesn't even touch on the one thing. He says the Master Arab cites a hadith from the Prophet. Okay, so he says the 1333, where he talks about the hadith that glorifies Ibn Abbas. Before we get to that, first of all, listen to where the conversation goes.
Authenticity of this story in their tafsirs.
Well, who cares what Ibn Abbas said? It's just his opinion. He probably got it from the Jews.
If he got the story of the whale from the Jews, then please cite the verse of the Torah or the passage in the Talmud where this is found. Besides, the whole point of my argument is why so many Muslims, including people like Ibn Abbas and the top scholars, shared this story. Surely if the Quran revealed a lot of excellent scientific information that conformed to reality, they wouldn't make such huge errors in their own understanding of reality. And by the way, Muslims hold Ibn Abbas as a very credible authority on the Quran's interpretation.
Now, this person that's about to speak is Mufti Menk, for those who aren't familiar with it. So we have Mufti Menk speaking.
So Allah says, oh, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, give this young boy a deep understanding of the deen and grant him knowledge of the interpretation of the revelation, which means tafsir of the Quran. And truly, later on, this Abdullah ibn Abbas was known as Habrul Ummati wa Turjumanul Quran. He was known as the jurist of the Ummah, the one who had the most knowledge in jurisprudence of the whole Ummah. And he was known as Turjumanul Quran, which means the one who had the deepest knowledge of tafsir and the revelation and why verses were revealed and what they meant.
Let me just quote him again there. He was known as the one with the deepest knowledge of tafsir and revelation and why verses were revealed and what they meant.
This scholar doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay, there are several narrations that show us that Muhammad himself held Abdullah ibn Abbas and his knowledge in high regard. Here's one. The Messenger of Allah embraced me and said, O Allah, teach him wisdom and the correct interpretation of the book.
Well, scholars can be wrong, but Allah...
So we have right there where he cites the hadith and he says, where it glorifies the hadith or glorifies Ibn Abbas. Ironically, as I showed above, Ibn Abbas contradicted himself from claiming the meaning of nun being the whale to an inkwell. We haven't even touched on the other meaning cited in the tafsir. So he basically says, yeah, Ibn Abbas contradicts himself. But here's why it needs to be important. Oh, hold up. Trying to add something here. Because we're going to pull out the YouTube and show something. So let me see here. Browser. Alright, so we're going to show a video here. Let me just get this on full so we can have it on ready, from a Muslim by the name of Dawa Man. And here's an interesting thing about it, because he even goes to this hadith and offers the exegesis of it in the Arabic and why Ibn Abbas is important. So because he's part of the members of the Sahaba, right? So let's go ahead and get into this.
All three of them said that Lahu al-Hadithi refers to music. Brothers and sisters, who was Abdullah ibn Abbas? He was the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for him. Allahumma faqihu fi ad-din wa 'allimu ta'wil. The Prophet said, Ya Allah, give him understanding of the religion and teach him the interpretation of what? The Quran. Brothers and sisters, let me ask you a question. Is the dua of the Prophet ever going to be rejected? No. The Prophet is making dua for him, that he is able to interpret the Quran. And Allah teaches him this. The Prophet's dua is never rejected, and his dua is for him to interpret the Quran, and guess what? He's interpreting this ayah and the Quran to be music.
So, then that was talking about Surah 31, Ayah 6. But however, the comment there about the hadith that is mentioned in the other Islamic sources is still much a valid point. And the hadith that is mentioned by him comes from Sunan Ibn Majah, and the English reference is Volume 1, Book 1, Hadith 166, or for the Arabic reference, Book 1, Hadith number 171. So right there we have the issue where it is settled by even the Muslim here that expounds upon this in Islamic theology. So now remember, this is just me going to the Muslims. This is not me going to some other person. It's not a Muslim necessarily. This is the Muslim that explained this about that hadith and what it means, and why then Ibn Abbas is so important. So if then Ibn Abbas is contradicting himself, and he, according to the dua, the prayer of Muhammad on intercession for Ibn Abbas to Allah, unless you want to say that yes, Allah can reject the prayers of Muhammad, then you can have a shot there. But if you admit that the prayer was answered, then it is agreed that what Ibn Abbas is saying, he didn't say this is just simply one opinion when he talks about the noon. When he does talk about the other thing, there is a different aspect to it as well. But if we go with the idea that in some of these, that all of a sudden he's saying it is an inkwell, when he also said it is the whale, then we have Allah giving him supposedly correct interpretations of the Quran, but he's contradicting himself at that point. So this again makes it even much more, not so much a good reason for me to join Islam at that point concerning one of the companions of Muhammad. So I'm going to skip the parts about the Shia thing, because honestly, if it comes to that, I'm not even interested in being a Shia Muslim, and I don't think that, and as this person even says themselves, they are not a Shiite, and they don't know the Shia background in anything. So concerning that, we just have, at least from this, gathered two things. We have, number one, established that if there is no whale, fine, then we still have the establishment of a flat earth. And if we then want to go the other route and say that Ibn Abbas contradicted himself, then we have Allah sending mixed signals to Ibn Abbas as to the correct interpretation, and therefore causing Ibn Abbas to contradict himself multiple times. This is not looking real good. So, finally, we move on to the second part in the reply paragraph, where he goes on to the third point I made, which is about the Qira'at of the Quran. To which he says, the Quran is preserved through oral transmission and mass memorization, which, again, is something that is cited as a means of saying that the Old Testament has been preserved. You don't need the text then, if that's the case. You have the oral transmission. And the same can be said of the New Testament regarding the earliest periods, because indeed that was the case. So when he says this is actually baseless, or that it has no foundation, that me saying that me talking about the Qira'at of the Quran is baseless, meaning it has no foundation in fact according to the definition of what baseless means, then you're essentially saying there is no different Qira'at. There's just one Qira'at. There's just one only, and that there's no variation. If that's the case, you're wrong. Because even as you say, the exact number of how many Qira'at are there it may differ from scholar to scholar, but as far as he has seen, the majority view is 7. As far as I'm aware, the majority view was 10, and that the aruf was 7, but the kirat was 10. So, again, you'd have to show me some sources that support this statement. But it's not baseless when there's facts that there are different kirat and that there are different textual variations. And if it indeed is perfectly preserved through oral transmission in the sense of what these people are trying to state, then why is it that it differs from the earliest of the Qurans? Why does it differ from the earliest Quranic manuscripts? Because to me, that would be something that, if it is preserved of something that was from where its original perception is, then that means it should read word for word like the earliest copies of the Quran, which is the same thing we do with textual variants of the New Testament when we look into the earliest manuscripts and then try to figure out what part is of the original and the earliest text. That's not being applied here, because all it cares about is saying oral transmission, and by saying oral transmission, you shut down scholarly research into the field of studying the text of the Quran as a result. When there's this thing called textual criticism, and many people are trying to engage in this, including some Muslims, but are being shut down because of this whole thing of oral memorization and oral recitation of it, even though there's discovering more textual variants along the way. Heck, a book was just published that I had gotten entitled Corrections in Early Quranic Manuscripts by Daniel Brubaker, who is about to publish a doctoral thesis on these different textual variants that he has just discovered in the early Quranic manuscripts fragments. So then we see Abu Zakaria, a well-known Muslim apologist, a scholar, wrote in his book The Eternal Challenge, says, unlike other scriptures, the primary means of preserving the Quran has and always been through memorization. And we have certainly made the Quran easy for remembrance, so is there and who will remember. Surah 54, Ayah 17, is memorization really a practical way of preserving the Quran? One of the ways God made the Quran easy is to remember the unique style of the Quran itself. As a rhyming style, so he just keeps on going about the rhyming nature and the rhyming style of the Quran. But here's the problem with that, though. If we're going to say that that's the case, that it's about the oral memory and the oral recitation, then we come across problems of conflict. We come across problems of war. In fact, let me go ahead and see if it's... So he just says the whole thing was just about oral recitation, and that there are some hints that show this, of making it easy with poetry and all these other things. But he says, quote, in regard which Qira'at is more similar to the original text, which I said, which one is more like the one that's in the preserved tablet in heaven with Allah, he said, the general belief is all of them is acceptable to recite. That's not my question, though. I know and I accept that all of them are acceptable to recite. That's fine. That's not my question, though. Which is closer to the original? Because the one scholar I cited, is it Abdul? I forget his, no, Shazad Salim. Was thinking of another scholar. Dr. Shazad Salim. He said it's the Hafs that's the original to the time of Muhammad and to the time of, or it was in the Tablet of Heaven. That if you were to take a look at which one is much more closer to what's in the original Tablet in Heaven, he said it's most certainly the Hafs Quran. And so that would be fine, and I would like to know what his explanation for that is, because he really didn't give it in the one paper that he wrote. But when it comes to it, that all he's saying is all these are acceptable to recite. It's not my question, so answer the question instead, which is much similar, much closer, and is almost identical to what's in heaven right now with Allah. What is it? I don't care which one is acceptable. I accept that all of them are acceptable to recite concerning the authentic Qira'at. My question is, which one is identical? Because regardless if one's acceptable, I'll agree. If I was a Muslim, I would say, yeah, these are acceptable, but I don't care. I want what is up in that tablet in heaven with Allah. That's what I want. I don't want just something just simply acceptable, because that would be me desiring and hungering for truth. And that's what I would care about as a truth seeker. That's why I'm a Christian. But here's the thing. If you're going to say oral preservation, what about Yasser Qadi in his book, Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran, where he says that unfortunately the Muslims started differing amongst themselves with regards to the recitation of the Quran. So the Muslims from Syria were reciting the Quran differently than the Muslims from Iraq. Now, Aruf, different Aruf. Okay, we can go there. That this is just different acceptable Aruf. But here's the problem. Acceptable Aruf, they were differing. Instead of being perfectly preserved in just simply one dialect in one region, and says that they began contending with each other. So the Muslims from Syria were reciting the Quran differently than the Muslims from Iraq. They began contending with each other, each regarding his recitation superior to his brothers. These Muslims were not companions and therefore were not trained in the proper manner and etiquette of the recitation of the Quran. So they weren't trained in the proper manner and etiquette of reciting the Quran. So it doesn't matter that this was some sort of preservation and these people then were not companions of Muhammad. So you still have a problem there. So right here then, we have a hadith that comes from Bukhari 4987. It says, Hudayfa bin al-Yaman came to Uthman at the time when the people of Sham and the people of Iraq were waging war to conquer Armenia and Azerbaijan. Hudayfa was afraid of their, which is the people of Sham and Iraq, differences in the recitation of the Quran. So he said to Uthman, O chief of the believers, save this nation before they differ about the book, which is the Quran, as Jews and Christians did before. So they're about to get to a point where it's almost like us Jews and Christians on difference on the book, but it's already getting to that state almost already where it's at, but they just can't handle it to the point that you have a different recitation or you have a different aruf or a different kirat. I fight you, I killed you, essentially. They're waging war. Lives are dying because someone disagrees with a recitation of the Quran. So much for perfect preservation in that regard, if people are going to try to kill each other about it. So Uthman sent a message saying, send us the manuscripts of the Quran. So now, it's not oral memory anymore. It's about get the written text. Get the written text. Get the manuscripts that are written down, not oral manuscripts, written manuscripts of the Quran, so that we may compile the Quranic materials into perfect copies and return the manuscripts to you. Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Uthman then ordered Zayn bin Thabit, Abdullah bin Azubas, Sayyid bin Alas, and Abdul Rahman bin Harith bin Hasham to rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. Uthman said to the three Qurayshi men, in case you disagree with Zayn bin Thabit on any point of the Quran, then write in the dialect of the Quraysh, the Quran revealed in their tongue. They did so, and when they had written many copies, Uthman returned the original manuscripts to Hafsa. So right here we have the collection and compilation of these different little manuscript things here. And then it says, and he ordered all the other Quranic materials which were written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies to be burnt. So we have again, and this is even affirmed by Ibn Asakir in the History of Damascus, cited by Muhammad Mustafa al-Azumi or Azami in History of the Quranic Text, that according to what Uthman said, the people have diverged in their recitations, and I am determined that whoever holds any verses dictated by the Prophet himself must bring them to me. So the people brought their verses written on parchment and bones and leaves, and anyone contributing to this pile was first questioned by Uthman, did you learn these verses directly from the Prophet? So it then says, with the task complete, the ink on the final copy dry, and duplicate copies dispatched, there was no need for the numerous fragments of the Quran circulating in people's hands, so all such fragments were burned. Musab bin Sa'd asserts that the people were pleased with Uthman's decision. At the very least, no one voiced any objections. So far, again, it's about the text here. Now, in another one here, and I'm forgetting which one this comes from here, but I'm just going to play a clip from me, and listen carefully. For Muhammad tells his followers to go to concerning the Quran, reveals something in a Sahih Hadith in At-Tirmidhi, which can be found in Volume 5, Book 44, Hadith number 3104, which says, Ubaidullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah informed me that Abdullah bin Masud disliked Zayd bin Thabit copying the Mus'haf, and he said, O you Muslim people, avoid copying the Mus'haf and the recitation of this man. By Allah, when I accepted Islam, he was but in the loins of a disbelieving man, meaning Zayn bin Thabit. And it was regarding this that Abdullah bin Masud said, O people of Al-Iraq, keep the Mus'haf that are with you and conceal them. For indeed Allah said, and whoever conceals something, he shall come with what he concealed on the day of judgment. Surah 3, Ayah 161. So meet Allah with the Mus'haf. Al-Azuri said, it was conveyed to me that some men amongst the most virtuous of the companions of the Messenger of Allah disliked that view of Ibn Masud. And remember that Ibn Masud is considered one of the three or four people that we are to get our understanding of the Quran from, according to what that one blogger said. Because he did mention that in one of the things, that there is indeed a hadith that mentions four people, one of the few people to go to for the understanding of the Quran, and one of them was Ibn Masud. Another one of them, by the way, just for trivia on the list, was also Ubay ibn Ka'b. So right there we have him disagreeing with this method and saying, hey, don't give up your copies of the Quran. So yeah, it's not just something about oral recitation. Even during that's the reason why the Uthmanic revision happened, is because people were differing over the oral memory thing at that point. And apparently they tried to do this to remove that, but still some of it survived. And now some of it survived in book written form of the Qur'an. So far, that doesn't satisfy or address the whole thing there, and just simply, in my opinion, is dismissing and not caring about the subject. Next, he says textual variants in the Quranic manuscripts, which sorely disappointed me, because all this is essentially one basic sentence and a complete sentence. He said this is baseless. No, it is not. There are indeed textual variants. There is variation. In fact, let me just pull some out here. This is from the book Which Quran, edited by Ibn Warraq, but is actually authored by several different scholars, such as Theodore Noldecke, Arthur Jeffrey, and of course there's even others that is found in other books. But for now, we're going to go here and just simply pull out some textual variations that is in it. So right here we have this is concerning we're not going to that particular one, because there has been some skepticism on that particular article lately. But it's certain textual variations that are not just in modern Quranic manuscripts with the Qur'an, but even in other different ancient ones. You have some that are like, what was the ones that I even cited again? I think that's the main reason that I brought them up. According to Arthur Jeffries in his thing, he had mentioned that Surah 2, Ayah 275, Al-Athena Yakulunar Riba La Yakumuna. Those who devour usury will not stand. But in another Quranic variant that exists according to other sources that cites Ibn Masud's adds on after the word Yakumuna, adds Yamal Qiyamati, they will not be able to stand on the day of resurrection. So those who devour usury will not stand on the day of resurrection. So Surah 6, Ayah 153. Wahana hatha sarati, verily this is my path. But Ibn Masud reads, Wahatha saratu wabakum, this is the path of your Lord. Again, not a significant variant, because I mentioned there's minor things that aren't really that much problematic. I'll agree, honestly. But you then have things that can add to the meaning and change the meaning. Then you have in Surah 3, Ayah 158, in the Paris manuscript, that is a manuscript 328A or 328B in Paris, France. Surah 3, 158 reads, normally, if you should die or be slain before him, you shall undoubtedly be gathered. In the earliest manuscript of Surah 3, 158, it reads, you shall not be gathered instead. So which is it? Because we have one text that's the earliest. And I want the earliest. I want the most original, not what some things are being said now. And even in the Sa'ana palimpsest, after examining it, discovers not only is there a missing verse, that is Surah 9, verse 85 missing in the earliest text, but also then you have the dip variants being of the standard text saying, do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination, according to one of the things, I believe it's in Surah 2, 196. And it says, do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination. Another one says, do not shave, period, until the offering reaches its destination. So right there we see a difference in shaving your heads versus just don't shave, period. And then we, of course, had the missing verse. These are all significant. These aren't just something to dismiss. And this is why Keith E. Small, in the Textual Criticism and Quran Manuscript, says in page 6, he says, one major discussion in Quranic studies has centered on the search for an text, that is, an original text of the Quran. Islamic tradition has usually identified the Quran as we know it with this text, and his view has achieved a status of religious orthodoxy. In contemporary popular Islamic discourse, it is an assertion oft-stated as established fact that the text of the Quran has been preserved perfectly since it was given to Muhammad. To the contrary, early and medieval Islamic scholarship was quite free in its recognition of textual variation and missing portions of the Quran, and did not tend to make claims of perfect transmission. So now, when he says that it's baseless, Quranic Islamic scholars who were Muslims would disagree with you. The fact is that indeed these textual variants existed. So just because you claim oral preservation, that's what I'm disputing because of the Quranic manuscripts. So that alone is not a good, sufficient enough excuse. Now then, the next thing he says is that about the depiction of Jesus being fictional, which is especially considering that it says that Jesus was not crucified due to Surah 4, 157, even though, according to Bart Ehrman, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate, which is not just stated by the Gospels, which is also stated by Josephus, which is also stated by Tacitus. There is good evidence about the crucifixion and the death of Jesus. But of course, according to him, he says, quote, actually, it is historical. Early Christian documents stated that the crucifixion did not take place, such as the Apocalypse of Peter, which denies Jesus was crucified, and also the second treatise of Seth, who thought Jesus was replaced by Simon of Cyrene, and Jesus watched on in the audience. The Gospel of the Pisidians and the Nazarenes, the people of Jesus' hometown in Palestine, also deny the crucifixion took place. Most of these aren't Christian documents. All right, like for example, Apocalypse of Peter, 2nd century, from Gnostic groups. Then you can do the same thing with chicken like these other things. The case where you have the second treatise of Seth. Let's take a look at the second treatise of Seth. It is one of the Gnostic texts found at the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt, a Gnostic text. Now, when was it written? That's where we're going to have to look into next. Dates to around the 3rd century. So, which is more reliable? The 1st century document, which is when Jesus was crucified in the 1st century, would you be willing for me to accept that something that's considered Sahih authentic that comes from the Quraj, or Quaj, I believe is what they're referred to as, or the Mutazilites, that I should accept what they say and what they believe, because they claim that their teachings came from, Allah. They claim that they got their teachings from Muhammad, but they're considered deviant sects in Islam, just like the Gnostics are considered deviant or heretical to Christianity. So these aren't Christians. That's like saying that if someone says that Muhammad was not a prophet, but he claims that he believes in Allah and he believes the Quran and he believes in the Hadith, that's like saying that that person's a Muslim just because, even though he has all these things, and even though he rejects that Muhammad was a prophet, then boom, he's still a Muslim regardless. I would not use that same line of pathetic reasoning concerning the issues about the Quran, or to define who's a Muslim. I would try to keep the idea that a Muslim is someone that is in orthodox beliefs, and that these deviant sects would not be Muslims. I wouldn't even say an Ahmadi is a Muslim, honestly, but I still have Ahmadi friends that I try to interact with. Now, so you have these documents, and these are Gnostic sources, and hence why there is a theory in Quranic studies that Muhammad got his information from the Gnostic sources. So the fact that you're citing these are just simply proving a point, the Orientalists and what they're saying. But then you also have the fact that concerning these, that the Gnostics, you can't try to say that these guys are like Muslims if you do try to use that argument, because some do, because they believe that the creator God was a wicked, evil Satan, essentially, a wicked, evil demiurge, and that Jesus was the one to fight back against it. So, but he says the Quran says an event took place. However, Jesus was not crucified, but was made to appear so unto them, meaning someone was replaced. That's one theory. According to Yasser Qadi and various others, there's actually multiple different theories about it. Some say that he swooned, and that's what it meant by it was made to appear. So swoon theory comes into play. Another just simply says that it made him look like he died, but he didn't even swoon or even died itself. So there's like different theories in Islamic views about this particular issue on Surah 4, Ayah 157. So there you go with the substitution theory, though, and I think that even that would be something that is not possible. But anyways, it says, if you consider the Bible a historical text, which I do, it's similar to it in some degrees. It says Jesus was crucified in all the four Gospels and in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 4. There's a lot of non-canonical Gospels even agree with the Quran, like the Gospel of Thomas, again, 2nd century, and contains Gnostic teachings, and probably why some scholars believe that the Quran, that Muhammad or some of the companions or whatever borrowed from the Gospel of Thomas to create the Quran when it came to the story of Jesus. And also like early Christian groups such as the Ebionites. And I like how he tries to go with this, so let's just read what he says here. These early followers of Christ, they were an antichrist cult, which even would disagree with Islam, were addressed as Ebionites, which was derivative of the Hebrew Ebinim, the poor ones, because they believed that their life of poverty emulated Jesus. That's one theory. The title gives yet further clue to the origin of the group, as it has a strong connection to the primitive church, as stated by Bernhard Loos. The name they applied to themselves, Ebionites, poor ones, had reference to an honorific title given to the primitive church. This is in the Short History of Christian Doctrine, from page 73. And so then he says these other things, which essentially by the end says, for the Ebionites, the supposed death and resurrection of Jesus had little significance, and their soteriology salvation did not depend on some God-man's entity sacrificial act on wooden stake, but on faith in God and adherence to his laws and commandments, which besides mirroring is important Islam places on following God's orders. It's also, incidentally, the exhortation of Ecclesiastes 12:13. Okay, so first of all, the issue was not about theology. That was the reason why I addressed this. The reason why I addressed this is because of the facts of history, and that 2nd to 3rd century sources later on from people that sometimes were trying to act like they were being written from Peter or Thomas or any of these others were immediately refuted and easily dismissed by the early church as being false and ahistorical. So these other 2nd century documents would be the equivalent of me accepting something from an Ahmadiyyan written source, or written sources from the Quraj or the Qadariites or the Mu'tazilites, that I should accept their literature or their material because they claim that they, follow the path of Islam and that they follow the path of the Sunnah of Muhammad and everything. But right here, we're going to deal with, so he cites Bernhard Laus. Now, let me just point this out. Bernhard Laus, shall we? Or Los. Now, let's see here. And according to this book, The Short History of Christian Church, doesn't even give me a date on how old it is. Published in 1978. Here we have the most recent 2nd century book, which deals with the Ebionites, which are actually not even a 1st century group, but a 2nd century group. And this book here, called Christianity at the Crossroads by Michael J. Kruger, How the 2nd Century Shaped the Future of the Church. We have, according to starting page 113, on the Ebionites, here's what we see. One of the central flashpoints in early theological debates was whether a person needed to follow the distinctive aspects of the Mosaic Law, circumcision, Sabbath observance, dietary restrictions, in order to be saved. In other words, did a person have to become a Jew before he or she would become a Christian? Apparently, this was not the only issue that led to the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, but also the issue that Paul addressed in his highly polemical epistle to the Galatians in Galatians 2, verses 11 through 21. Apparently, there were groups of Christians even in the 1st century which Paul labeled the circumcision party. Galatians 2:12 and Philippians or Philemon 3:2 that answered this question with a yes. When we come to the 2nd century, we learn of a group that held beliefs very similar to the opponents of Paul battled in his letter to the Galatians, the Ebionites. This is not to suggest that the Ebionites existed in the 1st century. The evidence suggests that Ebionism originated probably sometime in the 2nd century, according to Richard Bachman in his article on the origin of the Ebionites in Peter J. Thompson and Doris Lambers Petrie's work, The Image of Judeo-Christians in Ancient Jewish and Christian Literature, which was published in 2003. Pages 162 to 81, if anyone wants to look into a full discourse on that. But the Ebionites, like the Galatian circumcision party, were Christ followers who refused to abandon the Jewish system of law observance as they knew it. The origin of the name is a bit of a mystery. Some say its group's founders was a person named Ebion, which is something affirmed by Tertullian as what he proposed. And regardless, while others suggest that it comes from the Hebrew word meaning poor, which is something that Eusebius mentions. But regardless, Irenaeus tells us that those who are called Ebionites, quote, practice circumcision, persevere in the observance of those customs which are enjoined by the law, and are so Judaic in their lifestyle. As a result, and not surprisingly, they repudiate the Apostle Paul, maintaining that he was an apostate from the law. Likewise, Hippolytus affirms that the Ebionites believe that they are justified according to the law. And Justin Martyr, while not using the formal name, appears to refer to the beliefs of the same group in his dialogue with Trypho, where he says, quote, Trypho inquired again, but if someone, recognizing that this man is the Christ, and has believed and obeys him, wishes, however, to observe these institutions, will he be saved? I said, in my opinion, Trypho, such a one will be saved, if he does not strive in every way to persuade other men to observe the same things as himself, telling him they will not be saved unless they do. In addition to the rejection of salvation by faith alone, the the Ebionites held to a number of other beliefs that stood at odds with traditional Orthodox Christianity. So they reject sola fide, which is something that Jesus taught, which is something that Paul taught, which is something the entire New Testament church of the 1st and 2nd century taught. The Ebionites disagreed. Most notably, they rejected both the virgin birth, hence a problem with Islam, and the divinity of Jesus, opting for more of an adoptionistic Christology. Jesus was an ordinary human being, they claimed, who was born physically from the union of Mary and Joseph, and was later adopted as Messiah by the Holy Spirit due to his holy and righteous life. Right there would be a problem again with Islam there. However, it should be noted that some scholars attributed more of a separationist Christology to him before his death. Such scholarly disagreements are not uncommon given the ambiguity of the patristic sources and the overlap between adoptionistic and separationist Christologies, which sometimes makes them difficult to distinguish. The Ebionites also had their own writings. In addition to accepting the authority of the Old Testament, the Ebionites may have used a gospel which some called the Gospel of the Hebrews, which was possibly a modified version of the Gospel of Matthew. Scholars have dubbed this mysterious gospel the Gospel of the Ebionites. Noteworthy among the features of this Ebionite gospel, at least according to the excerpts from Epiphanius, is the fact that it did not contain the account of the virgin birth. This fits quite well with the historical testimony mentioned above that the Ebionites rejected the virgin birth and viewed Jesus as the natural offspring of Joseph and Mary. Just as Paul rejected the Judaizers of his day, the major voices of early Christianity roundly condemned the teachings of the Ebionites. Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Hippolytus, Tertullian, Origen, and later Epiphanius all regarded the Ebionite doctrine as out of sync with the apostolic faith that had later been handed down to them. Jerome even tells us that Ignatius and Polycarp also opposed the Ebionites, but there is no mention of the Ebionites in their extant writings. More strident in his criticisms was Irenaeus. He compares the Ebionites to heretics like Cerinthus and Carpocrates. He condemns their rejection of the Apostle Paul, and he pronounces judgment on them for denying the divinity of Jesus, or the divine identity of Jesus. God will judge also the Ebionites for how, and this is the quote here from, let's see here, verse 24. This is from Irenaeus, where he says, quote, God will judge also the Ebionites, for how can they be saved unless it was God who wrought out their salvation upon earth? Or how shall man pass into God unless God has first passed into man? The existence of the groups like the Ebionites also raise complex questions about how they should be labeled or described. The term Jewish Christianity has typically been used to describe movements that follow Jesus and yet still adhere to some degree to Jewish law observance. But scholars have rightly criticized this label as far too imprecise and even misleading. It leaves unclear whether one has to be ethnically Jewish to be regarded as a Jewish Christian, or whether one just needs to follow Jesus' Jewish practices, or both. The problem with the identification are also exacerbated by the obvious overlap between Judaism and Christianity, as noted in chapter 1. From one perspective, all Christianity is Jewish since it follows a Jewish Messiah. Nevertheless, the term Jewish Christianity still has a broad usefulness as a way to describe Christ believers who maintain a faithful adherence to the law. When it comes to defining groups that seem to share both Jewish and Christian traits, Carlton Paget defends the traditional terminology. Possibly, we should admit that the word Jewish Christian remains the best, even if an adequate way of doing such a thing. And by the way, before I continue reading, even then, like the Talmud and other sources of Jewish practice affirm that Jesus was crucified. It is worth noting, however, that not all Jewish Christian groups were the same. Also active during the 2nd century was a group of Jewish believers known as the Nazarenes. Although the Nazarenes continued to observe the Mosaic Law, they did not require its observance for salvation. Indeed, unlike the Ebionites, they embraced the Apostle Paul and his mission to the Gentiles and appeared to be generally orthodox in their Christology. So that's the Nazarenes. However, the reliability of this profile of the Nazarenes is complicated by the fact that they are only mentioned by name in later sources, namely Epiphanius and Jerome, and sometimes even these writers seem confused. Nevertheless, some scholars have made the case that it was the Nazarenes and not the Ebionites that can be traced back to the 1st century to the earliest Jewish believers in Jerusalem. If they are correct, then the earliest Jewish Christian groups appeared to be of the Orthodox variety, and the divergent factions, like the Ebionites, were a later, 2nd century development. But the patristic sources that describe these various Jewish Christian groups are often contradictory and make it difficult to determine which groups have in mind. So right here, what we're seeing is that, again, that all we have is the Ebionites that claim to be Christian, but we can't date them back to the 1st century. They were criticized heavily within the 2nd century, and eventually by the 3rd and the 4th century, even much more so, if you can believe that. And yeah. So the fact is that the Ebionites were indeed not Christian. They were not teaching a historical truth, and in fact they were able to be refuted historically. Just like the people that will try to make historical claims about what Muhammad said and taught via the form of debate between the Mutazilites and the Khawarij and all these other different ones. They are going to come across some problems. So yeah, that went on for quite a while. So yeah, that's the response to Thermal STALK. We'll see if he responds to this, because he already responded to the first part that we did at this point. So go ahead and get the outro music playing. Why not get it on some sort of a tradition? Hold up. Alright, there we go. Now, I really hope that Thermal STALK considers what we've been addressing and what we've been talking about. And we'll see what happens in the next episode of Theological Discussion once we see if Thermal STALK responds to everything in this episode. But so far, the only thing that was really touched on that could have been convinced was just one point, and that was the scientific errors in the Quran. But even then, I'm still not fully convinced or bought in on that. And in fact, during the response, I just had more questions and more confusion, and even much more of a reason not to join Islam concerning differences and contradictions within even the interpretations of the Sahaba and the companions of Muhammad. So those are some things that also show that the Quran is definitely not clear as it claims to be in one of the surahs. But anyways, this has been your boy RC Apologist. Thank y'all for tuning in. And until then, do yourselves a favor and take care. This has been RC Apologist.